FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And it's been a busy one. There's been a lot of things going on, especially the beginning half of this week. There was a lot of things going on, specifically as they related to agriculture. We'll do our best to summarize all of them. I would also encourage you to visit agripulse.com to read all of our coverage, because there's going to be some things that happen that we're not going to be able to get to here in this video. But obviously the big news that came out of Washington this week was the official installation and swearing in of Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. He had been long been nominee, but it was very widely assumed that he would actually get through the confirmation process, get an affirmative Senate vote. Actually got that on Monday, was sworn in Tuesday morning. And Phil, in his first remarks to USDA employees, there weren't a ton of policy nuggets. A lot of that had to do with things that he wanted to say to the USDA workforce, but he did talk quite a bit about trade.
Right, and that's the definitely the message that the administration is getting, Sonny Perdue is getting from the Hill, from farm groups. There's a lot of concern about President Trump's trade policy, his criticism of the North American Free Trade Agreement, his withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Sonny Perdue, the new Agriculture Secretary, obviously got the message, and that's what he talked about to employees of USDA there on Tuesday morning. And again, that was a message that came out of the meeting later that day at the White House with a group of farmers, with Sonny Perdue there, now the Ag Secretary, on at the right hand of the president.
Mm-hmm. So obviously a very key message, and he mentioned it several times in that speech about the need to export the bountiful crops that America grows, I think was his exact terminology. But Phil mentioned a trip to the White House. He also was involved in the formation of a task force that'll have some more news and events going on. But really some other action out of the White House this week also had something to do with trade. And there were some interesting reports that have been swirling around, particularly Wednesday into Wednesday evening. There were reports that the president was working on an executive order to withdraw the United States from the North American Free Trade Agreement, and those reports were later countered with an announcement from the White House that, well, we're not actually going to withdraw, but we did talk to Canada and Mexico, and this renegotiation thing is happening.
Yeah, it was quite a day. These reports started coming out in the afternoon, and almost immediately you saw farm groups, particularly in the grain and oilseed sector, put out some statements, very unusual statements actually, in terms of the alarm that they were expressing at the idea that the United States would withdraw from NAFTA. And this concern was sitting out there until about 10:30 on Wednesday night. The White House put out a statement saying that the president had talked to the leaders of Canada and Mexico, and never mind, we're going to stay in NAFTA. We're going to renegotiate it. We're all on the same page. And again on Thursday morning, he was saying the same thing to reporters, or the president was saying the same thing to reporters at the White House. So make of that what you will. It would maybe this is the art of the deal in the Oval Office. Make threats, get attention, and then pivot. That's certainly what happened on about a 12-hour period on Wednesday.
And if there were any question about where a number of agricultural groups stand on potentially withdrawing from the North American Free Trade Agreement, there isn't anymore. They've certainly made their positions known on that.
Shock and alarm, terrible idea. It was,
a lot of
distressed.
That was another. As you mentioned, a lot of very strong words coming from prepared statements, which are usually not exactly throwing a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at situations like this, but that was the case this week.
Yeah, I don't know if that had anything to do with the White House pivot on that, but they certainly got a strong reaction from the farm groups, and again, especially from the grain and oilseed sectors.
And another thing that happens Wednesday night, and we want to close with a couple of brief hits here, but another thing that happened Wednesday night, we finally saw the release of a bill that is going to fund the government because, and we haven't been avoiding this intentionally, this topic, but government funding does expire at present at the end of the day on Friday. But we did see on Wednesday night, we did see the release of a bill that would continue that funding here for another week.
Another week through next Friday. That's important because it reflected the fact that they're close to an agreement on a funding bill for the rest of the fiscal year, which runs through September 30th. That's important to keep the government running, but we're following it closely for some other reasons, some provisions that we expect to be in that bill. One of them would probably make cotton eligible for the price loss coverage program. We expect another provision, or at least the dairy producers are pushing for another provision, and if cotton is in there, dairy is likely to be in there, and that would make some tweaks to the probably to the margin protection program for milk producers. So cotton and dairy, there's to be some other issues that may be addressed in there as well, but those are two very big ones that will affect the Farm Bill when lawmakers get down to working on that as well, because it would create funding going into the Farm Bill for those two commodities.
So stay tuned with us into next week for developments on that regard. We'll be sure to keep you up to date on all of the news and events in terms of all things appropriations and spending and omnibus and whatever they're packaging and terming the legislation that's go around. But I want to wrap up with just another mention of something that's going to have a big impact, particularly among the public lands users and the folks in the western United States. This week, President Trump signing an executive order calling for the review of all monument designations greater than 100,000 acres or expansions that made them greater than 100,000 acres of the last 20 years. And that last 20 years part is particularly important because that would allow for the reconsideration of the Grand Escalante Staircase designation in Utah, as well as Bears Ears in Utah, which is so two designations fairly close to each other in Utah that a lot of the public lands folks, a lot of the cattle producers, sheep producers, a lot of folks that rely on public lands grazing in the western part of the United States, very happy to see this news and announcement, but nothing set in stone at this point. No designations are officially revoked. This just allows for Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to reconsider some things, and they have, I believe, it's 120 days to do that reconsideration, and that'll be something to watch here into mid to late August in terms of what that executive order will amount to in terms of some of those reconsiderations.
One other issue we probably should mention too is tax reform.
Right.
This is going to be in the works for months down the road, but this week the president came out with his 100th day coming up on Saturday. He released some basic principles of where they want to go in tax reform, and significant potential implications for farmers, because they're proposing to lower the tax rate for corporations and also pass-through entities, owner-operated businesses. Farms should fall into this category, partnerships and so forth. Lower that tax rate to 15%, depending on all the details, and we don't really have any of them yet. It could have a significant impact on farm operations. We'll be following that in the weeks and months to come. Again, a lot of negotiating to do. This is just a starting position from the White House, and a very bare bones one at that.
And if you're looking for a little bit of a deeper dive into that bare bones agenda, such as it is, Phil's got a good write-up on Agri-Pulse.com. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. But we still need to see some kind of proposal from Congress, still need to see some legislative language. We're very early in this process, but some signaling from the administration about where they stand here. But I know this is a bit of a long video, but quite frankly, there was a lot that happened this week. A lot of things keeping the folks at Agri-Pulse very busy on their first week and Congress's first week back in town after the Easter recess. A lot of things that happened. A lot of things are going to happen here coming in the coming week as they look to secure some kind of government funding mechanism, as well as moving forward with things like tax reform, like Farm Bill deliberations, and also healthcare. A lot of talks going on about healthcare on Capitol Hill right now too. So be sure to stay tuned to Agri-Pulse.com for how all of those things will impact the world of agriculture policy. But for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.